When society starts to fracture, most people imagine shortages happening slowly. They don't. Scarcity doesn't roll in like a storm you can see coming. It snaps into place overnight. One day the shelves are full. The next day they're bare. And they stay that way. And here's the part that catches everyone off guard. It's not the expensive stuff that disappears first. It's the cheap, boring, everyday items no one thinks to protect. Not because they're rare, but because everyone can afford them. When panic starts, people don't buy what they need most. They buy what they can buy in volume. $5 here, $10 there, just in case. Multiply that by thousands of people acting at the same time, and you get instant depletion. This is how shelves empty in hours. Modern supply chains are built for efficiency, not resilience. Stores don't stock for emergencies. They stock for predictable demand. There is no warehouse in the back filled with extras. What you see on the shelf is the supply. When demand spikes, even slightly, the system breaks. Factories can't ramp up fast enough. Trucks don't magically appear. Workers don't suddenly feel safe enough to show up. And when one link fails, the entire chain stalls. That's why restocking doesn't happen quickly. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. Cheap items also disappear because they're universal. Everyone needs them. Everyone understands them. There's no learning curve, no explanation required. When fear kicks in, people default to the familiar. That familiarity becomes a liability, because the moment people realize something is essential, it's already gone. There's also a psychological trap at play. People assume that because something is cheap, it's replaceable, that it'll always be there, that they can grab it later if things calm down. But collapse doesn't reward later. It rewards early. Cheap items vanish first because they sit at the intersection of three dangerous forces: affordability, necessity, and panic. They're easy to justify buying, easy to hoard, easy to overlook until the window closes. And once they're gone, they don't come back quietly. Manufacturers prioritize high-margin products. Governments redirect supplies. Distribution gets rationed. What used to cost a few dollars becomes unavailable at any price. This is where regret sets in. Not dramatic regret. Quiet regret. The kind that hits when you realize the problem wasn't money or effort or space, it was timing. This video isn't about fear buying. It's about understanding how shortages actually happen. Because collapse doesn't start with explosions. It starts with empty shelves and people saying, "That's weird." By the time the headlines catch up, the cheap stuff is already history. And the people who saw it coming aren't scrambling. They're watching everyone else do it for them. That's why these items matter. Not because they're rare, but because when you finally need them, you won't be able to find them at all. The first item to disappear during collapse is almost never dramatic. No one posts about it, no one brags about stocking it, and no one thinks it's urgent until it's gone. That's why it disappears first. This item lives in the background of daily life. You use it constantly, but you rarely think about it. It's cheap, lightweight, easy to grab. And because of that, people assume it will always be available. They're wrong. When panic begins, this item vanishes not because it's rare, but because it's quietly essential. Everyone needs it. Everyone understands its value instantly, and everyone can afford to buy a lot of it without thinking twice. That combination is lethal to availability. The moment people sense disruption, they don't ask whether they need this item. They ask whether they might need it later. And that just-in-case logic empties shelves faster than any official shortage. There's another reason this item disappears so fast. It's part of a fragile supply chain. It relies on cheap manufacturing, overseas production, and just-in-time delivery. Stores don't keep backups because it's not profitable to do so. There's no incentive to overstock something that usually sells steadily and predictably. So when demand spikes, even briefly, the system can't compensate. And once the production slows or stops, restocking isn't delayed by days. It's delayed by months. This item also gets hit by institutional demand. Hospitals, shelters, emergency services, municipal agencies. When things start to wobble, they pull from the same supply you do. But they do it in bulk, and they do it fast. By the time you realize it matters, procurement has already drained what's left. Here's the part most people don't think about. This item isn't just useful. It's foundational. Other systems depend on it. Other solutions assume you have it. Without it, small problems multiply. Hygiene becomes harder. Storage becomes riskier. Improvisation becomes messier and less effective. It's not glamorous, but it's a force multiplier. And that's why people regret skipping it. They didn't think it was important enough to prioritize. They didn't think it would be the first thing gone. They thought they'd pick some up later. Later never came. This item disappears quietly, without headlines or warnings. One day it's there, the next day it isn't. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back in trickles. It comes back, if at all, after the situation has already stabilized, which means it's useless by the time you can find it again. This is the pattern you need to recognize as we go through the list. The most important items don't announce themselves, they don't look urgent, and they don't wait for you to realize their value. Item number 10 is cheap. It's boring. And when collapse begins, it's the first thing people wish they had taken seriously. Item number 9 disappears even faster than the last one. Not because it's more important, but because it's easier. This is the kind of item people grab without thinking. They toss it into carts by the handful. They buy multiples because it's light, compact, and cheap enough that no one questions the purchase. That makes it dangerous during collapse. Because when panic hits, portability becomes priority. People don't want bulky gear. They don't want heavy items. They want things they can move, store, and carry without effort. And this item fits perfectly into that instinct. It doesn't take much for demand to explode. A rumor, a headline, a single viral post. Suddenly, everyone wants the same thing at the same time. And the supply can't keep up. This item is usually manufactured overseas, shipped in massive but infrequent batches, and stocked thinly on shelves because it doesn't generate much profit. Stores rely on steady turnover, not stockpiles. So when shelves empty, they empty completely. There's no maybe tomorrow. There's no backroom inventory. There's no emergency restock. Once it's gone, it's gone. Another reason this item disappears so fast is because it crosses categories. It's not just a survival item, it's a household item, a travel item, a workplace item. That means panic buying comes from every direction at once. Families, businesses, institutions. Everyone reaches for it simultaneously because everyone already knows what it's for. No education required. And here's the psychological trap. People underestimate how quickly small, cheap items disappear because they assume substitutes exist, that they'll improvise, that they'll make do. But substitutes are slower, less effective, more wasteful, and in a stressed environment, inefficiency compounds fast. This item saves time, effort, and energy. 3 things you lose rapidly in a crisis. Once it's gone, people feel it immediately. Tasks take longer. Mistakes increase. Stress rises. And stress leads to worse decisions. That's why this item becomes critical, not because it's dramatic, but because it quietly holds systems together. It's also why it becomes a target. Once scarcity sets in, people notice who has it and who doesn't. It becomes something you don't leave lying around, something you stop sharing freely, something you ration without realizing you're doing it. And unlike food or fuel, there's no natural alternative that fills the gap completely. Item number 9 disappears not in waves, but in a flash. One afternoon, it's everywhere. That evening, it's nowhere. And by the time people start asking why they can't find it, the answer is already irrelevant. Because this is what collapse does. It doesn't remove the things you expect. It removes the small, light, obvious tools you assumed would always be there. And once you notice they're gone, you're already too late. Item number 8 is the one people dismiss. They joke about it. They roll their eyes. They tell themselves it's overkill, paranoia, something only extreme people worry about. That reaction is exactly why it disappears. This item doesn't feel urgent because most people have never experienced a situation where it mattered. In normal life, it's background noise, something you replace casually if you think about it at all. Collapse changes that instantly. When systems break down, this item stops being optional and starts being necessary. Not for comfort, for function. Without it, small problems don't stay small. They snowball into health issues, sanitation problems, and avoidable emergencies. And when people finally realize they need it, they all realize it at the same time. That's when it vanishes. There's a second reason this item disappears so fast. It's cheap, but it's not prioritized by manufacturers. It's produced steadily, not aggressively. There's no surge capacity, no incentive to ramp up production quickly. When demand spikes, supply just stops. And because it's not seen as critical infrastructure, it doesn't get protected or rationed in an orderly way. It simply runs out. Then comes the improvisation phase. People try substitutes. They reuse things that shouldn't be reused. They stretch usage past what's safe. That's when infections rise, hygiene collapses, and preventable problems turn serious. This item sits at the intersection of dignity and survival. People don't like talking about it. They don't like admitting they need it. And they definitely don't like thinking about what happens without it. So they ignore it. Until it's gone. And here's the part that stings later. This item is incredibly cheap to buy ahead of time. It takes up very little space. It doesn't expire quickly. And yet once collapse starts, it becomes one of the hardest things to find. Not because it's rare, but because everyone suddenly understands its value. This is the moment where scarcity stops being abstract. You can't will this item into existence, you can't replace it easily, and you can't go without it for long without consequences. People who skipped this item didn't think they were taking a risk. They thought they were being reasonable. Collapse punishes that assumption. Item number 8 isn't dramatic. It isn't tactical, and it won't impress anyone. But when it disappears, life gets harder in a very real, very fast way. And the people who laughed about it before? They're not laughing when they can't find it at all. That's why this item never lasts. Not because it's exciting, but because it's quietly essential and underestimated right up until the moment it's gone. Item number 7 doesn't just disappear. It changes status. Before collapse, it's forgettable. Cheap. Something you grab without thinking. You wouldn't protect it. You wouldn't count it. You wouldn't imagine it having leverage over anyone. After collapse, it becomes currency. Not official currency. Not money. Something older, more primitive, more reliable. When systems fail, money loses meaning faster than people expect. Cards stop working. Cash becomes limited. Prices fluctuate wildly or stop existing altogether. What replaces it isn't chaos, it's barter, and barter runs on usefulness. Item number 7 becomes valuable because it solves a problem other people have. Not hypothetically, immediately. And in scarcity, immediate usefulness beats everything else. This item disappears fast because people sense that shift instinctively. They may not articulate it, but they feel it. They start buying more than they personally need. Not to use, but to hold. To trade. To keep options open. That behavior drains supply faster than panic buying ever could. There's another reason this item vanishes early. It's divisible. You don't need to trade all of it at once. You can trade portions, units, pieces. That makes it perfect for informal exchange. Low risk, low commitment, high flexibility. Those qualities are deadly to availability. Once people realize it can be traded, shared, or withheld strategically, it stops being an item and starts being leverage. And leverage is hoarded. Institutions notice this too. Aid groups, shelters, emergency responders, they stockpile it quietly, early, and in bulk. They don't announce shortages, they just remove inventory from circulation. By the time the public feels scarcity, the supply is already locked up. Here's where most people miscalculate. They assume bartering only matters in long-term collapse. That it's a future problem. Something to worry about later. It's not. Barter starts almost immediately, just informally at first. Neighbors helping neighbors, small trades, quiet exchanges, and the items that enable that process vanish before anyone admits that's what's happening. This item also creates risk. Once scarcity sets in, people notice who has it and who doesn't. That awareness changes social dynamics. Sharing becomes selective. Trust becomes conditional. What was once common becomes sensitive. That's when visibility becomes a problem. The people who thought ahead don't show it. They don't advertise, they don't trade publicly. They understand that the value of this item isn't just what it can get them, but what attention it can attract. Item number 7 disappears because it stops being personal supply and becomes social power. Not flashy power, quiet power. And that's why it never stays on shelves. Not because it's essential for survival alone, but because it becomes essential for interaction when systems no longer mediate. Exchange. People who miss this one don't just lose convenience, they lose options. And in collapse, options are everything. That's why item number 7 doesn't come back once it's gone. It doesn't need to. By then it's already found a new role and a new value that money can't touch. Item number 6 doesn't disappear because people panic. It disappears because the system behind it breaks. This item depends on timing, tight margins, predictable demand. A supply chain that runs like a machine. Parts arriving just as they're needed, nothing extra sitting around just in case. That efficiency is a weakness. When even one part of the system slows down, fuel shortages, labor gaps, transport delays, this item stops moving. Not gradually, immediately. Stores don't have reserves of it. They don't expect spikes. They don't have a backup supplier waiting in the wings. When the flow stops, the shelf goes empty and stays that way. And here's the dangerous part. People don't realize it's gone until they need it. This item isn't something you think about daily. It sits quietly in the background, doing its job without demanding attention. You notice it only when it fails. And by then, replacement is no longer an option. During collapse, that failure rate skyrockets. Equipment wears down faster. Improvisation causes damage. Stress pushes tools past their limits. Suddenly, everyone is trying to replace the same thing at once. That surge doesn't just empty shelves, it overwhelms manufacturers. Replacement parts don't arrive. Production slows or halts entirely. And because this item isn't considered critical, it doesn't get prioritized when resources are scarce. It just disappears. This is where people make a costly mistake. They assume they'll fix problems as they arise, that they'll adapt, that if something breaks, they'll just grab another one. That logic works in normal life. Collapse punishes it. This item is cheap to buy now, but expensive to replace later, not because the price changes, but because availability does. Once it's gone, substitutes are clumsy, inefficient, or unsafe. Workarounds exist, but they drain time and energy at exactly the moment you can least afford it. And time is what this item really saves. It prevents small failures from cascading into big ones. It keeps systems running smoothly when conditions are already strained. It buys margin. Something collapse removes everywhere else. That's why professionals always have extras. Not because they expect disaster, but because they understand failure rates. Item number 6 disappears because modern life assumes it will always be there. That assumption is baked into how things are designed, repaired, and maintained. When it's removed, nothing quite works the way it's supposed to, and people feel that loss immediately. Tasks slow down. Repairs get sloppy. Frustration increases. That frustration leads to mistakes. This item isn't glamorous. It doesn't scream survival. But when it's gone, you feel the absence everywhere, which is why it never comes back quickly. By the time production recovers, if it does, the damage has already been done. People who secured this item early don't look prepared. They just look calm. And in collapse, calm is usually the giveaway that someone understood the system before it failed.